We created our first getter and setter methods on the title property because we want to control the incoming format. The next property in the class is an array of ingredients. We could set this up as a simple array of strings. These strings would be the full ingredients, just as you would see them in a recipe. 2 cups flour, 1 egg, 1.5 cups of milk, and so on. This would work fine if we just want to print out a list of ingredients. It does make it harder to control the format this way. Are we going to accept numbers, such as fractions, 1/2, or decimals, like 0.5? It also makes it more difficult when it comes to combining ingredients to make a shopping list, which is something we'll be doing a little later. Instead of using a single string for each ingredient, we're going to set up our ingredients as an associative array. This will allow us to break our ingredients up into parts and better control the formatting and merging of items. Let's look at an example of how the data will be stored. Each ingredient will be an array with 3 keyed elements: item, such as flour, amount, such as 2.5, and measurement, such as cup. We'll add more ingredients, and each of these individual ingredients will then be stored in a basic numbered array. Let's start adding the ingredients. Instead of just setting the property all at once, we're going to add individual ingredients. So we'll use public function add ingredient. This method will accept 3 arguments: item, amount, and measure. Only the first item will be required, so we can add a default value of null to both the amount and the measure. This will allow us to accept things like egg 1 without a measurement, or maybe lime to taste without an amount or a measurement. After accepting these 3 arguments, we want to add them to our ingredients as an associative array. This ingredients will add an element, and our element will be an array. We'll have a key of item, and we'll set this to item. Our next key will be amount, and we'll set this to amount. And finally, measure. We can also format these values, like using UC words on our item. We can also require that they pass a float or an integer as the amount. Before setting this ingredient, we'll check if amount is not equal to null and or not is float, amount, and not is int, amount. If we haven't passed a float or an integer, then we want to exit our script with a message. We can also add more information about what they did pass. getType tells us which type the amount is. We can also require that they pass a valid measurement. To do this, we have to first define which measurements we're going to accept. To do this, we're going to add another private property. Private because we don't want anything to be able to change our measurements. We'll call this measurements, and we'll set it to an array. We want teaspoons, tablespoons, cup, ounce, pound, fluid ounce, pint, quart, and gallon. You can change these however you want, or add other values. Now that we have defined the acceptable measurements, we can make sure that the measurement that we passed in is valid. If measure is not equal to null and in array, check measure in this measurements. Again, we want to exit our script with a message. We can tell them which measurements are valid by using implode. I also want to make sure that it's checking the lowercase version of measure. str for string to lower. I also want to set the lowercase version of measure. Let's see if we can get some errors. Let's add an ingredient. We'll pass egg and the word 1, and then dozen. Now let's run this script in the console. The amount must be a float, string 1 given. Okay, great. Let's change this string to an int. Now let's try running it again. Undefined property. Let's look up here. This should be an S. For measurements, now let's run it again. Great, now we see please enter a valid measurement with our list of measurements. We can now take off the measurement and try it again. Great, no errors. But we don't have any way to retrieve the ingredients yet. We need to add a new method.